Nintendo appears to be holding back a great deal on Switch 2 still. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I would like to have a discussion on how exactly Nintendo could still be holding back. So this discussion I would like to have here is a bit of a follow-up to a video I did a couple days ago where we got the news of Splatoon Raiders and the big Splatoon 3 update. And here we see another Nintendo title on the way coming to Switch 2, although the release timing is still up for debate. But from this recent reveal, it seems to be supporting a leak of a variety of other big Nintendo games, and now we have a pretty full picture of what may be going on here, so that's telling us about a few other big games that could be on the way. But then also on top of that, in that same day, I had a podcast with Brandon, the co-host of the podcast, as some of you may know who watch those live streams, and him and I got into a bit of an argument on just how good Splatoon Raiders looks. He felt that the visuals are rather underwhelming, and myself personally, I think they look pretty good. I like what I see, but I will also concede it's not like Splatoon Raiders completely blows me away either. I think it looks good for what it is, a spin-off Splatoon title. But with these things in mind and more, I started wondering, well, is Nintendo holding back here? Are they holding back on different games for the future? Are they holding back on revealing elements about some of their big games that are now on the way, such as Splatoon Raiders? Perhaps the reason why the visual style is not as impressive as one might think it could be is because there's something about the gameplay that is rather impressive, that requires that extra processing power. And can this be said for other Switch 2 games as well coming from Nintendo? There's a lot to consider here in terms of what Nintendo may or may not be holding back. Are there elements about some of the games we already know about that are being hidden that will show just how impressive some of these games are? And is there another game or two that Nintendo hasn't shown us yet that could be coming out for later this year? That's what I would like to dive even further into today. But before going forward, let me point out, I'm aiming for a goal of 60,000 subscribers, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So in somewhat relevant news to this video's topic, Nintendo has announced that the Switch 2 has sold over 3.5 million units worldwide in its first 4 days, becoming the fastest selling Nintendo hardware ever globally. And just for the record, this would place the Switch 2 as not just the fastest selling Nintendo hardware ever globally, but the fastest selling video game hardware period ever globally. As Nintendo points out later in this thread, Switch 1 sold about 2.7 million in its first 4 weeks, PlayStation 4 in its first 6 weeks sold about 4.2 million, and then PS5 in its first 7 weeks sold about 4.4 million. I remember that the PS5 came out in November, and by the end of the calendar year it had sold about 4.5. So point is, Switch 2, in a very short amount of time, has sold a great deal of consoles, is showing that it has some serious sales potential. It's also showing that Nintendo was ready for the launch by putting out a lot of consoles to meet demand. How will they maintain momentum? That part remains to be seen. But we do know at least about several games that are coming out throughout this year which may help to maintain that momentum. We have Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, we have Kirby Air Riders, we have Pokemon Legends ZA, and we just got an announcement for Splatoon Raiders, although we do not know when it is coming out quite yet. Some people are speculating that the game is going to come out fairly soon, like sometime this year, because the game has already been rated in a few different regions. So it may be the case that Splatoon Raiders could be coming out this year. However, I will say the fact that they did not include any sort of release timing in its initial reveal trailer has me considering that it could be coming out next year instead. And I will also point out we have seen several games in the past that have been rated well in advance, and they didn't come out immediately after they were rated. Metroid Prime Remastered, Fire Emblem Engage, even non-Nintendo games like Silksong for example. So I'm not going to assume, for sure, with 100% certainty, that just because we have seen that Splatoon Raiders has been rated in a few different regions, that it's coming out this year, especially when they have not provided any sort of window on the release timing. And I think this is an important point to consider here, because it does sort of have us wondering about what is going to happen this year in terms of other releases. Considering a rumor we got from Nash Weedle, which the reason I would consider is because Nash Weedle continues to get things right. He's told us we'd be seeing updates through the Nintendo Today app, such as perhaps Splatoon Raiders, which I'll circle back to in a moment here, but he's been getting a lot of things right about Switch 2. A free update for No Man's Sky coming to Switch 2, mouse controls in Metroid Prime 4, Donkey Bananza as opposed to 3D Mario in the Switch 2 Direct, the Tarnished Edition for Elden Ring, the leak of Assassin's Creed Shadows. Every few days we find something that Nashville said a few months ago that is coming to fruition. And so, point is, as more and more evidence presents itself, I think we have more and more reason to take what Nashville is saying seriously. And so he had said a little while ago, back in April, that there are supposed to be some different Nintendo Today updates. There's supposed to be 2 announcements for Switch 1 games coming in 2025, 1 announcement of a major game coming in 2026 for Switch 2, and 1 surprise title to release this year for Switch 2. And so what's going on right now is that people are debating what Splatoon Raiders is in relation to this rumor, assuming what Nashville is saying is true. And so Splatoon Raiders is an exclusive Switch 2 title. So it's not a Switch 1 game. It can't be construed as that. It would either be an announcement of a major game coming in 2026 or a surprise title for this year. Splatoon Raiders is a spin-off title, and perhaps a spin-off title that people did not expect, so perhaps you could refer to a title like this as a surprise title, but we also do not know if it's coming out this year, and Nashville in the past has suggested that this surprise title would be a pretty big deal. Now, Splatoon is a pretty big deal series from Nintendo, a pretty big seller, a 10+ million seller consistently. However, a spin-off title, I'm not so sure I would consider to be as big and major of a release. In general, spin-offs do not do that well. There are the exceptions, of course, but there tend to be spin-offs, right? They're not going to be, they usually don't build as big of an audience as the main series. And when we consider Splatoon, Splatoon's a big popular series, not for the single-player campaigns, but for the multiplayer. And Splatoon Raiders is seemingly a single-player adventure, which I myself am personally very interested in. I think this might be right up my alley. But in terms of appealing to the general Splatoon audience, I think we are talking about a fraction here. So odds are Splatoon Raiders is probably not going to be a 10+ million seller unless this kind of style of gameplay breaks off and does its own thing. But I'm kind of speculating here that Splatoon Raiders is basically kind of what we get within the Splatoon games already, but just the campaign parts of them. Now, I'm sure they'll mix it up a little bit, but I'm not so sure Splatoon Raiders is going to become so much of a big deal that it becomes its own independent series moving forward. Like, I don't see this becoming the Luigi's Mansion to 3D Mario or something like that, or the Smash Brothers or Mario Kart to 3D Mario or just the Mario series. But considering this, it does raise a couple questions here. What if it is a bigger deal? What if there's more to this game that will help it to reach a larger audience? Or what if there is another title that will be the big surprise title for this year that could perhaps be like the huge holiday release that will really help to round out the lineup to close this first year of Switch 2. And I've seen different people with the opinion that there will be no more major releases for this year. Of course, we just got the announcement of Splatoon Raiders, which might come out this year. But when I consider the games we have coming out for this year, I do think we need something else and something substantial. Because Pokemon Legends ZA and Metroid Prime 4, while I do consider those to be significant releases, especially Pokemon from a sales perspective, both of these titles are going to be Switch 2 edition games. And I actually think in the case of Pokemon, probably going to sell better on Switch 1. Prime 4, on the other hand, given the kind of game it is and the kind of audience it demands, me being part of that audience, most Metroid fans are probably just going to pick up a Switch 2 to play that version. I'm sure many people still enjoy it on Switch 1, but basically what I'm trying to get at here is that above 50% of Metroid Prime 4 owners are going to be playing it through Switch 2. Either way, because both these titles are Switch 2 edition games, we're talking about them not being as significant of releases for the Switch 2 because there will be a lot of people who will just play it on Switch 1. And so you don't have as many huge exclusives coming out for the holidays for Switch 2. Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, major exclusives, but they're coming out in June and July. What will be the major releases for the October, November, December period, where Nintendo generally comes out swinging, having a variety of major releases, oftentimes more than one per month, and considering that this is the launch year of Switch 2, one of the most critical periods of the console's life, if there's a time for Nintendo to kind of do what they've done in the past, where they've come out with several major releases in a short span of time, this would be it. Basically, I think we need to get more announcements, which I think a lot of people will agree with, not everyone, but that's my point here. And so maybe Splatoon Raiders factors into that, but given that it is a spin-off title, I don't think it's going to be like the big holiday title. I think there's gotta be something else. I am leaning in the direction of that this Splatoon Raiders title, assuming what Nashweedle has been saying is true, is the major announcement for 2026. But maybe I'm off here, because Nashweedle does refer to this title as a major game, and here I am trying to argue that Splatoon Raiders is not a major game, so maybe I'm just off. Maybe Splatoon Raiders is a major game, and it is the surprise title for this year, and that's why it's already been rated, because it is going to come out this year, and Nintendo just decided not to show off the release timing in this first trailer, because they're saving some announcements for a little bit later, perhaps in a direct not so long from now. If that's the case, perhaps there's something else to this game that makes it a bigger deal, and it has me circling back to this game and how it looks and how it presents itself, and other games as well. Because from what we have seen so far, while I do think the game is aesthetically pleasing, I do think it looks good, I like the water visuals and all, you can make a pretty decent argument that it doesn't look that much substantially better than Splatoon on Switch 1. And so it has us wondering, is this because of diminishing returns? Are Nintendo games just not going to look that much better? Or is there perhaps some sort of gameplay hook that Nintendo hasn't revealed yet that is kind of where they're putting more so of their efforts here? Some people might say, well, the Switch 2 just isn't that much more powerful than the Switch 1, it's just Switch 1 games at a higher resolution. But we have gotten some interesting information from a developer at Koei Tecmo working on Wild Hearts S. So here in this WCCF Tech interview, it was asked, in terms of raw computing power, is it closer to the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox Series S? This entire interview is about Switch 2, right? There are a lot of characteristics when it comes to raw computing power, so it's difficult to generalize, but I think it can be thought as closer to the Series S. So here we have a developer saying that the Switch 2, in terms of raw power, is closer to the Series S. And as you see later into this interview, they also say they're not even working with NVIDIA's DLSS super resolution on this particular game. So just in terms of raw power, the Switch 2 is close to a Series S, but there are other things to consider here. It is more modern hardware, there are other things going on such as DLSS, and it brings all that up to say that the Switch 2 is substantially more powerful than the Switch 1 by a significant margin. I mean, even if the Switch 2 was about as powerful as a PS4, I feel like some people might make the argument that if we take a look at a game like God of War or Horizon Zero Dawn, those games looked really impressive for the PlayStation 4. Are there any Nintendo Switch 2 games that measure up? And something that I do think we should take into consideration here, if you're looking at these games on like your smartphone or what have you, or through Twitter or even YouTube compression, you're not going to get the best understanding of just how much better these games look, because games on Switch 2 do enjoy high dynamic range and improved resolutions, 1440p, 4K, and there are some games that could run at 120 frames per second. I bring up Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, for example. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, the Switch 2 version, has a 4K 60 FPS mode and also a 1080p 120 FPS mode. But it should also be noted, and a lot of people gloss over this detail here, the textures are being improved on the Switch 2 version, and I will also add, yes, there will be high dynamic range. So it's almost like they are remastering the game for Switch 2. And yet, even as a Switch 1 title, when we saw it even last year, many people were wondering, is this a Switch 2 game? Is this Switch 2 footage? And it was not. But it goes to show just how impressive Metroid Prime 4 looks for a Switch 1 title. And what I find increasingly more interesting just talking about Metroid Prime 4 itself here is that we have gotten rumors that they are already working on Metroid Prime 5 as well, which is a rumor and maybe hard to believe for some because, well, we haven't even got Metroid Prime 4 yet, but they could be working on more than one thing at once, right? They could be wrapping up Prime 4 and starting the initial stages of Prime 5, different people working on different things, and considering how much of an investment Prime 4 is, you may want to take advantage of this technology, this engine you've put together for Switch 1 and I guess also by extension Switch 2, and put out a Prime 5 that perhaps takes even better advantage of the hardware. But considering what we've seen so far, what we've seen of Prime 4 on Switch 2, it does look noticeably better than the Switch 1 version, but the Switch 1 version still looks pretty good. When we compare what we've seen of Splatoon Raiders to Splatoon 3, for example, on Switch 1, Splatoon Raiders does look better, but does it look that much better? And many people have made the arguments that Mario Kart World does not look that much better than Mario Kart 8. I disagree. I think Mario Kart World looks better from a variety of perspectives. But some of these perspectives have in mind that there's a lot more going on within the world. If you just look at two screenshots side by side, maybe I can see how some people might confuse the two a little bit. Because I will at least concede that there is such a thing as diminishing returns here, and we are not seeing as substantial or as obvious of a leap, I should say, compared to, say, maybe the jump from N64 to Nintendo GameCube. That jump was noticeable for pretty much anyone, but the jump from Switch 1 to Switch 2, if you just look at some screenshots from your phone or through compression of Mario Kart 8 versus Mario Kart World, I can see how some people wouldn't see it doesn't seem like as much of a jump. But going back to this Ask Developer interview about the Switch 2 itself, Kawamoto said this: "The Switch 2 console's improved processor performance has allowed us to realize new types of gameplay that haven't been seen before. To give you some examples, in Donkey Kong Bananza, you can experience the exhilaration of being able to destroy anything you want in the game without restrictions. In Mario Kart World, all courses are now connected seamlessly in a single world, so you can drive from one course to the next." And I think this is an important point to bring up because it highlights that these games were not possible on Switch 1. So reading through this part of the Ask Developer series on Mario Kart World, when did you decide to move development of this game to Nintendo Switch 2? Sato: "Yabuki-san first brought up around 2020. Back then we had already had an idea of the next system's expected specs, but it wasn't until a bit later that we actually received working development units. Until then, we just had to proceed with the development based on provisional estimates." I see. So you had to use your imagination while developing the game. Sato: "When we were developing for Nintendo Switch, we often worried whether we could find the right balance between planning and performance. Of course, the Switch's system performance is sufficient for developing different kinds of games, but if we had included everything we wanted to in this game's vast world, then it wouldn't have run at 60 FPS and would have suffered from constant frame rate drops." And I'll stop it there. Point is, Mario Kart World was not going to work on Switch 1. They would have had to make some serious concessions, like as I talk about here. The game would have had to have been at 30 frames per second and would not have been as detailed or with a lot more going on. Maybe the animations wouldn't look so good, maybe the lighting engine wouldn't look so good, maybe the world wouldn't be so dynamic with all the destruction, maybe there wouldn't be 24 characters on track. There would have been a lot of things that they would have had to have sacrificed. They are going to have to make a lot of concessions. And so when you consider this, but then you also look at something like Donkey Kong Bananza, how the environments are entirely destructible, which is very demanding, something that would not be possible on Switch 1, I think we have to consider here that perhaps thanks to diminishing returns, a lot of these games don't look like such a substantial leap compared to the leap from N64 to GameCube. I agree. That seems to have been the case for the last few generations across all gaming companies. But that isn't to say there isn't a nice improvement. There certainly is. I am not arguing or denying that in any way, but what we are seeing with some different Nintendo titles, they are more focused on using this additional power to make better games, to provide us experiences that weren't possible, not truly, not in the right way, on Switch 1. So you look at the interconnected world of Mario Kart World, you look at all the destruction in Donkey Kong Bananza, these are new experiences that we have not seen before. And so then I come back to Splatoon Raiders. Could there be something about Splatoon Raiders that we have not learned yet that will kind of go to show that this game has a little bit more going on, and it's what they were more focused on when making this project? Like, we've seen that what appears to be the home base, like this wooden platform on the surface of the water, there's like a giant crane claw. It seems like in Raiders there is a hunt for treasure. Maybe you're going to go around these islands, you're going to be able to acquire treasure. This might be a little bit more of an open adventure. I don't think we have enough evidence to confirm outright yet, but definitely I think there's something going on here that's going to make this game feel interesting and unique. I also consider Big Man and how he's wearing what appears to be diving gear. Maybe we're going to be exploring underwater with Big Man in this campaign. Perhaps that's something to do with why he's being sprayed with all this ink to protect him when he goes underwater. I don't know. We still have a lot of questions about this one. But I do want to speak on one more point here before we close out. Because we take a look at Splatoon Raiders, and it looks almost kind of like a follow-up to Splatoon 3, almost like a second sort of DLC adventure that perhaps they simply expanded a bit. But then we look at Mario Kart World, and we know for a fact that it started development on Switch 1 very early on into the console's life, I might add. And then we look at something like Donkey Bonanza, and considering all the support we've gotten for all the different codename leaks, it seems like this one was codenamed Silver Star, and considering the rumors we've heard about a 3D Donkey Kong game being made by a 3D Mario team, staying back from very early on into the Switch 1 life cycle, I wouldn't be surprised if this game also started off as a Switch 1 title, but similar to Mario Kart World, they realized early on that what they wanted to do wouldn't be quite so feasible on Switch 1 in any sort of good marketable way, so they waited and tinkered until Switch 2. And then of course we have games like Prime 4 and Legends ZA, which are Switch 1 titles that have simply been enhanced a bit for Switch 2. This first wave of games we're seeing from Nintendo, at least some of them very clearly have roots in Switch 1 development. But what happens with that second wave? What happens when we see a game that was made with Switch 2 in mind from the very, very beginning? This kind of thing tends to happen with all console generations. That second generation of games made for the console always look far more impressive, always do some more interesting things. So it has me wondering about the potential of a Metroid Prime 5. It has me wondering about maybe that 3D Mario game that likely is not that far off. Not just considering the history of things on how there's always 3D Mario made available early on, but also the codename leaks that have seemingly been proven true with Project SP Red, a Mario title that is yet to have been officially confirmed yet, but I assume that's going to be something that's going to completely blow our socks away. And then whatever's next for Monolith Soft. They've been working on this new IP supposedly for many years. They have this codenamed Legacy project, at least according to the leaks that, again, that seemingly are correct because we've gotten already 5 of the 8 codenames confirmed already, basically. Echoes of Wisdom, Mario Party Jamboree, Breath of the Wild Switch 2 Edition, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and now Splatoon Raiders. If you have more questions about that, you can check the iCard for the video where I explain this a little bit more in detail. Point is, what's going on with that game? They've been working on that game for such a long time. We could possibly see one of these two titles, Mario or Monolith Soft's next project, maybe even both, teased in the next Direct, which I do not think is that far off. I know some people think that the next Direct might be way out because Splatoon Raiders was just announced, but this doesn't even have a release timing. This doesn't give us the information we need about Donkey Kong Bonanza. It just does not give us release dates about a variety of games that come out throughout this year. This doesn't give us the announcement of any sort of holiday title that Nintendo may need to put out to really fill out this particular lineup. This doesn't give us any information on a variety of third-party games that we have learned nothing of that we thought we might during Summer Games Fest. So I definitely think a Direct still needs to happen. And considering the last 3 years, these presentations have happened in the second half of June, not the first half. I know there was a rumor suggesting it would happen sooner, but that was a rumor, and every time we said, more likely, at least based off history, it should be happening in the second half. Now, even that's not confirmed. We'll see what actually happens, but I do think at some point Nintendo's going to have to make some announcements, and probably very soon. But what do you all think? Is Nintendo clearly holding back here? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.